Welcome back. Today we're going to go over signs of expressions, and basically we'll be able to determine the sign of each expression based on the number of negatives in the problem. So very first, key ideas. Any number multiplied by 0 is 0. When multiplying or dividing except for by 0, the number of negatives in the problem determines the sign in the answer. So what that means, if there are no negatives or if there's an even number of negatives in the problem, the sign of the answer will be positive. So if there's an even number of negatives, it's going to be positive. If there's an odd number of negatives, it will always be negative. Now that'll make more sense as we go along in this, but just know again, if there's however many numbers there are in there, if an even number of them are negative, then they'll be positive. If an odd number, they'll be negative. So our first example here, what is the sign of c divided by d when c is less than 0 and d is less than 0? So first off, I write out my problem, and then I figure out, okay, if c is less than 0, what sign is less than 0? And in this case, it would be negative, and d is the exact same, so I would have the sign that's less than 0. So I have negative divided by negative. Whatever number they are, it's a negative divided by negative. How many negatives are there? It looks like there's 2 negatives, and since there's 2 negatives, that means it's going to result in an even number of negatives, and we know that an even number of negatives is positive. So this answer, no matter what numbers go here, will end up as a positive. Next example. What is the sign of a times c divided by d when a is less than 0, and here's a typo, b equals 0 and c is greater than 0. That needs to be a c and d there. Again, that is a typo. So c equals 0 and d is greater than 0. So I start out by writing my problem, and then I go through. What is a? It says here a is less than 0, so that makes it a negative. Then I go to c, which is 0, and d, which is greater than 0. So I have a negative for a, and then in parentheses the c is 0, and then the d is greater than 0, so a positive. So then 0 divided by a positive number is 0. 0 times negative is 0. So this results as a 0 for our sign. Next example. What is the sign of negative x times y? So here we have a number line, and we could pick out these numbers specifically, but what we're caring about here is what is the sign. So I'm going to write out my problem, and then I'm going to figure out that this x is a positive number. Whatever it is, it's positive. And this y, whatever it is a negative number. So I can now write out my problem as negative x times y, and replace that x with a positive, and replace that y with a negative, and then we count. There's 1 negative, 2 negatives. That's an even number, so since there are 2 negatives, that makes this a positive answer. Next example. What is the sign of negative 4 times a times b, or negative 4ab, when a is greater than 0 and b is greater than 0? So I set up my problem, and instead of writing in a, what's greater than 0, positive or negative? And in this case, it would be positive. And then we go to the next one, what's greater than 0 for b, and that would be a positive. And I look at my problem. I have 1 negative and no other negatives here. These are both positives, so 1 is an odd number, so that makes this a negative answer. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know. Have a great day.